The New Testament lesson is from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus has been speaking with his disciples and then has moved to the broader crowd, and these words are lifted from this 11th chapter. But to what will I compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, "We played the flute for you, but you didn't dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn." For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, "He has a demon." The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, "Look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. At that time, Jesus said, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Look what I found. Thank you, hon. I hope it was worth it. It was Uncle Frank's farm that served as a lab for my dad's ag project. My father was the president of the Future Farmers of America chapter at Union Endicott High School. Dad raised popcorn and stored it in Uncle Frank's barn. And as Dad told the story of his popcorn, he grinned because of a little problem with the corn. I don't think it actually ever popped. I remember the farm pretty well, having visited there as a child. I can see Uncle Frank, tall, white-haired man, flannel shirt, and ruddy face. He was my dad's uncle, not mine. And then there was the physical look of a man who had worked hard all his life. Aunt Sadie was wispy, I suppose, as a younger woman, but she had turned wiry with age. Small in stature, but mighty in will, as they say, and brimming with hospitality. Together, they were a touch of American Gothic in Vestal Center, New York. I don't remember much about their house, except that it was white, fairly modest, as a farmhouse goes. When I asked my dad later in his life what he remembered about the house, he said he remembered being in the living room only once in his life. He said the kitchen is where the family gathered. When you visited, you went in the back door and you sat by the wood stove and talked in the kitchen. I remember the living room, especially the lamps, because as a young boy, I was interested in the fact that the lamps were crystal and stained glass converted from gas to electricity. I also remember the old furniture, far more quaint than it was comfortable. And I think of the house as being kind of dark, very quiet. After Uncle Frank's death, Aunt Sadie was moved off the farm. I use the passive voice because I don't know if moving was her idea. I remember no family discussions, no negotiations about that. All I remember was a new 2-bedroom house that she lived in, not far from the farm. When I would come home from college, Dad would say, "Why don't you call Aunt Sadie? I'll bet she'd appreciate a visit." So I'd get on the phone, I'd call her, and she'd say, "Well, I don't know who you are, but I sure would enjoy the company, so come on." I'd appear at her door, I'd tell her who I was, visit for a while, and then when I was about to leave, she'd stand at the door and say, "Well, I don't know who you are, but I enjoyed our visit." Needless to say, I wasn't in her will. I have a moment of life inspired by that farm and kind of imprinted in my memory. Uncle Frank standing by the rail fence with his two workhorses, King and Queen, standing next to him. Those horses never moved. They were too old to carry a young boy even a short distance on the farm. I'd love to travel that two-lane road back to Vestal Center to that time, revisit the farm now. That yearning first occurred to me when Joan and I lived in a little quarter-acre lot in a subdivision in Richmond, Virginia. I wanted to move back, though, to a place where the acreage encompassed rolling pasture land. I wanted to move back to a time when you'd eat supper in the kitchen. And then after a leisurely meal, you'd move to the front porch and you'd sit and rock for a while and watch the sun go down. I'd covet listening to crickets and birds instead of Wheel of Fortune on the tube. I would trade a studio full of fabulous prizes for a porch with a swing. I know it must seem strange to be nostalgic for a time I've never lived, but that place of beauty and quiet symbolizes, and not stereotypes, but symbolizes the seemingly simpler life of previous generations. If life were simpler, then it's because there were so many fewer choices that people had to make. Work and play occurred from sunrise to sunset within your own fences for the most part. You might find some of your bread at the general store, and you might pick up your mail there too, but your major shopping was by catalog, and your civic center was the church. It was an era when tough physical labor day by day meant that you didn't have to join a health club in order to get exercise. Uncle Frank never needed a Cybex or a Nordic track. He never had to walk or run a half hour for exercise. On the other hand, lest I romanticized life on that Vestal Center farm, I wouldn't trade our modern bathrooms for the outhouse, the two-seater out in the back. And I wouldn't look forward to going out to the backyard pump first thing on a frigid winter morning to get water for my coffee. And I wouldn't enjoy the race to the tub to use the bath water first, while the second and third place contestants had to sit in my water. And then the laundry was dumped into the same water with the dirtiest things coming last. I once talked with a woman who was raised on a North Carolina farm who said, everybody smelled funny, so nobody noticed. Well, follow me back to that country road in Vestal Center as I return to Frank and Sadie's farmhouse for a nostalgic visit, not as a boy, but as a sentimental grandnephew a generation or so later. I picture myself driving into the driveway, convincing myself that this is the place that looks so familiar, the trees, the house, the barn. It's been remodeled, of course, some over the years. The driveway's paved now. Garage has been built since Sadie moved away, partially obscuring a view of the old barn. A couple of newspapers in the mailbox. You know what that means? The people are away. So I won't get to go inside the house. It's probably so different now it wouldn't be familiar yet. I can park my car in the drive and take a look around the yard to see if anything prompts a memory or two. With nobody at home, I don't have to wait for an invitation. So I go around to the back porch, and I notice the old pump is gone now. They've built a nice deck. The barn remains, though. I pretend that King and Queen are still standing by the fence. I walk to the barn, its old doors hanging at rusty hinges, barely. The wood is cracked, and anything but a delicate pull might bring the doors down on me. Quick look around as I pull the door open, just a quick murmur, forgive me my trespassing, but I want to see this place. Actually, I could look between any two boards in the barn's walls and see what I needed to see, but the door's open now, so I enter, memory inviting me in. Except for the dirt and the dust and the broken slats on the floor, the place is pretty empty now. The musty odor has been locked inside for years. My eyes adjust to the darkness, my lungs adjust to the dust, and my conscience adjusts to my lack of invitation to tour someone else's property. There's a ladder going up to the loft, looks surprisingly sturdy, but sturdy enough to hold my 200 pounds. Let's see. So I climb carefully, rung by rung, and as I test each step, I can imagine the headline in the Vestal News saying, "Retired pastor trespasses, pays and fatal fall from local hayloft." I survive the climb, though, and I step onto the second floor and I survey the loft, seeing that there's almost as much floor there as there was on the ground level, but the loft is swept almost clean, as if it's expecting company. Daylight flows through a loft window with a brilliant shaft of light that shoots through the dusty air onto the planked floor as if George Lucas had directed the scene. One dazzling space that brings an otherwise dark barn to life. And then I hear voices. They're back. My heart leaps into my throat. My adrenaline pumps through my guilt-ridden system. I could run and hide, but they'd have my car. So I decide I'll laugh when they find me, an innocent, embarrassed kind of laugh. And then when I introduce myself, I'll put the emphasis on the reverend part. As I glance behind me in a panic, I realize they're the ones who are laughing, and I feel some relief. I'm sure they've entered the barn below, but I don't hear their voices coming from there. No one's come up the ladder behind me, but the voices are getting louder, and it seems they're not so much under the floor beneath me, but on the floor with me, as if they've been beamed into the loft by that shaft of light. The room is suddenly filled with denim and gingham, and oil lamps are placed around the walls, and someone remarks about what a good job Frank has done cleaning up the place. Someone asks about the new folks a couple of miles down the road. Have they been invited? No, they don't have much use for barn dances. They're Methodists. Amid the walls filled with farm tools and implements, the warm light of the lanterns and the warm laughter of friends and family gathered close, a fiddler applies some rosin to his bow and stamps out a two-step rhythm and plays the first tune of the evening. A guitar and a bass join in, and a caller invites the squares to the floor. A few kids dragged reluctantly from the periphery to complete a couple here or there. And I hear a simple tune with really silly lyrics that no one else is hearing. Dancers whoop and holler as partners are swung, and do-si-dos are do-si-doed, or done saw done. Some slower tunes in waltz time are swung, and the squares break into couples, and couples dance close and catch their breath. The bass fiddle keeps time, the guitar adds a gentle rhythm, the fiddle cries for a while during that slower song, singing its ballad. And then a quick change of tempo. The guitar is exchanged for a banjo. And the music brings hands together to clap the time, and feet clog around the floor, temporarily free of the cares of the week. And the whole place is full of celebration. I stand there, just watching and listening with delight, and remembering the fiddle that we found in the attic of my childhood home, that yellow house across the street from the church on Liberty. It was a fiddle that we found in the attic, and my mother said, you know, that was my grandfather's fiddle, and he used to play it at barn dances. It was the only instrument in our house that we hadn't rented for school lessons. I wonder if Joseph Campbell ever had anything to say about this kind of mythology. Simple times in rural places, country folk who worked close to the land and whose life was full of risk in planting the seeds, nurturing the plants, harvesting the crops. People who cannot help but be anxious about tomorrow when it has rained too much for too long or not at all. I wonder if these folks can pass their dances down to their children. Are canning and quilting and barn raising still part of this ethos? As family farms die, will their music fade too? To be replaced by the technological revolution of electric instruments and electronic keyboards and a grand new Opry channel with its own cable franchise? But here, in this imagined country corner, acoustic music is still played on stringed instruments akin to lute and harp. Let the record show the pastor has pointed to lute and harp in the stained glass window, providing a rural soundtrack to the farm community's joy and pain, from its richest harvest to the killing drought, from the rankest chores to the blue ribbon prize at the county fair. The dance goes on in the loft. No one pays me any mind. And then my eye is drawn to an ancient symbol of agricultural labor hanging on the wall behind the band. It's a yoke, you've guessed, designed to harvest 2 ox power and a reminder of pre-tractor days. For these dancing farm families, the yoke symbolizes not so much past plowing, but present burden. For these dancing farm families, the weight of the farm itself is their yoke. It's the yoke of the farm that pulls the family together and holds them together. Yes, the yoke is their common burden and their shared strength. From gathering the morning's eggs to going to bed with bills unpaid, the simple life is a hard life. And Saturday night, the dance is their respite, as if the Sabbath began at sunset. Beyond the reels and the two-steps and the nonsense lyrics, their music begins to tell stories, singing a blues-like lament that provides a cathartic escape, with psalm-like tales of praise and blessing, abandonment, exhaustion, and worry. I can let them go now. The music's fading. The dancers are saying goodnight. I stand alone in this empty barn, once someone's storehouse or stockhouse, now abandoned to dust and memory and bequeathed to subdivision. My visit comes to an end as I back down the ladder carefully again, step by measured step, and close the old door behind me. Frank and Sadie would be surprised at how much I miss them, how much I enjoyed their home, and how much I wish I could have ridden king and queen down some country path beyond my imagination. As I get in my car and drive away, I take home the image of the yoke and its burden and the fiddle and its liberation. I need not turn on the radio, for I can hear the sound of spirited music, dancing feet, light hearts. The yoke. Jesus spoke of it as a symbol for the heavy load of Pharisaic laws that weighed people down and bent them over, but as the gentle teacher who fulfills the law. He offers an easier yoke to bear, acting side by side with us sinners to bring us into fellowship with himself. I use the yoke in my story to symbolize the back-breaking burden of the farm, but you may have your own heavy yoke to bear. Sorrow or guilt, anxiety, a difficult decision you're having trouble making that weighs on you. Maybe it's a laborious or boring job or an empty retirement. Maybe a persistent illness or an addiction. Maybe you identified with the Apostle Paul's struggle over knowing the right but living the wrong. Whatever negative image we apply to the burdensome yoke, Jesus is offering respite and rest for the weary and the heavily burdened. His is a gentle rabbi's call to a Sabbath when it is most needed. An early Christian writing says it well. If you can bear the Lord's full yoke, you will be perfect. But if you cannot, then do what you can. Side by side, together, we work and we rest. Jesus knows that life has its hardships and always will, but he's willing to lift the yoke and hang it on the wall for a while, offering a time of rest. Let him. A brief word about the fiddle. A violin, as you know, can sound a lament, crying and weeping the depths of human pain. But when that same instrument is transformed into a fiddle, well, even the word is kind of odd and funny sounding, and the instrument sings a lighthearted doxology that moves even tired feet to dancing. Maybe it merely helps us forget our burdens for a while. Or maybe, as the music soothes, it adjusts the heartbeat to a rhythm that we can live with. After I'd written this sermon, pretty much done, just for the heck of it, I looked up the word fiddle in a couple of resources I have. And I found this verse from the 19th century poet William Morris. He places the music scene not in a barn, but in an inn, and it says the same thing the sermon said, but only in 4 lines. Sorry. But lo, the old inn, and the lights and the fire, and the fiddler's old tune, and the shuffling of feet, soon for us all shall be quiet and rest and desire, and tomorrow's uprising to deeds shall be sweet. See, the respite, the rest, the Sabbath may be temporary, but the break does, you see, refresh our spirits and renew our energy for life's labors and life's love. Like a pastor's sabbatical, like a quiet Lord's Day, like a prayer breathed in the midst of the busyness of a day. The Lord of the dance is calling the tune, and it's one of redemption and rest and recreation, which is also pronounced recreation. Listen for his music, join in his rhythm, and follow in the dance.